We're back again.
Okay.
Let me ask you something.
Uh-huh.
What about the idea that if the whole system wasn't dominated by the people who've been in too long, regular citizens could come and get things through faster?
I'm not sure how wisely and well the regular citizen would end. I think they would end up or find out that they had ended up with more things that they're going to have to redo, because there is the problem of just plain having sufficient information and figuring out solutions. If we only had to figure it out for one little special interest or one little group, we could tend to do that. But when we pass a piece of legislation, we are supposedly doing this with the idea that it will serve the common good.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the problem. And it takes, for every action there's a reaction, and every time you think you've figured out the best thing, then bango, you find out a loophole or a way that the law doesn't work. So this is one of the things I'm trying to learn is I hear some of my colleagues say, well, this is a loosely written piece of legislation, or this piece of legislation isn't written as well as it should be. And I'm trying to learn the things that I need to look for to know what does make a good piece of legislation.
Mm-hmm.
The general idea, probably a lot of us have a feeling of what are our major ideas in that way. But there is an art and a skill. And this, of course, we are greatly aided by the reviser's office that
mm-hmm.
draws the bill up for us in the legal language. So those who have been here a fairly long number of years still have great aids. Now this could be true possibly of people who are here for a shorter period of time, and because sometimes that loose legislation is introduced by people who've been here long enough to maybe know a few. I'm not sure how much. Maybe we need a schooling in how to write good legislation. What are some of the things we need to?
That's fascinating. So, given all of this, given the fact that, if I'm understanding you right, this is a very complicated process, that it requires experienced leadership and talent and ethics and decency and all those things we look for. How do you go about accomplishing what you're here to accomplish? Do you have a mentor? Do you have a group of people you work with? Do you have a strategy or a style?
Oh, I certainly have people that I admire and that I watch and that I respect. And these are the people who've done their homework.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the people who usually don't have some axe to grind. They have a principle or a reason, a very strong reason that they're meeting a problem that faces our state as a whole, I think. SRS, the question of any young person in this state not having adequate food and shelter and then an education, I guess the thing we most need is an individual who loves and cares for us. But, just because you love and care for someone doesn't mean that you're going to do for them the wisest things. So we have, but I think a legislator who truly does say, what are the basic things that state government is supposed to do?
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me the names of some people you have watched and modeled yourself after?
Yes. John Solbach,
okay,
in the area of the judiciary, and his wise stories, his examples. Carol Sater,
mm-hmm.
Very much I respect. Of course, Marvin Barkus, I think he is think he is just really an exceptional man in that he is so soft-spoken, and he has a very strong back, and he knows his principles, and he does not he cannot be swayed from his basic beliefs. His one of his chief concerns is for the children of Kansas, and I would have to agree with him there that we must provide opportunities for everyone, and then they can take care of themselves pretty well if we give them the opportunities. Tom Sawyer Michael Tom Sawyer from Wichita, I have a great respect for. He, as a freshman, I served in a little cubicle next to his office, and he was kind enough to discuss and tell me information on bills and so forth, and ethics. I think he is. Well, I know he is the chairman of our elections committee, and I think he's done a splendid job in that area. He helped me a great deal to understand the windfall and the tax question. And as a freshman, I really was at a loss to understand many of those things. And I just think and then of course Donna Whiteman. I really feel that she's outstanding and an exceptional person, be she man, woman, or child. She's just an outstanding and fine person. I'm sure I'm forgetting some people that, but those are our legislators in the House that I certainly have.
Well, that's fascinating. One of the obvious interests we have, since we are interviewing women legislators,
yes,
although it's also one of the more manageable groups, and we do have ambitions to pass outside of the gender.
Right.
Obviously, we are interested in whether you think the fact of your gender has at all changed your experience in running for election, in how your constituents look at you, in how you are treated or you operate in the House, etc.
I think as far as running for office, for me at least, I wouldn't want to generalize this, but I think I felt a responsibility to my family, and I probably would not have run any sooner than I did. And I mean, I didn't go out seeking the office, which I feel that maybe the next generation, young women who are interested in this, and I think this is a healthy, very healthy thing that is happening. But I'm sure that probably had, as far as gender, that probably was the greatest influence on me. As far as my winning against my first opponent, I do not think that my gender was any advantage whatsoever. The last time my opponent did make the comment that she felt that because she was a woman, she could say more cutting things or stronger things about me than a man might be able to say. I do not know if this is true or not, but I have found that within a short period of time in the legislature itself that you rise and fall on your knowledge and your skills and your ability. And I have not particularly been aware of a feeling of gender discrimination within particularly my party. There may be some, except that I know very strong women legislators on the other side of the aisle, So maybe I don't want it to be there, and so I don't see it.
Well,
I have
it
not.
isn't there.
I can't say that I feel that I have been the recipient of any doors being slammed or anything like that.
Are there any bills that you got involved in, and it doesn't necessarily mean your name is on it, although I'd be interested to hear that you fought for, win or lose, that you're particularly proud of or saw as particularly important things?
Let's see. I can't, as I say, the first term was so taken with the malpractice question, and that really wasn't ever really a bill. So I think, well, one little smaller bill, and here we are. Something we've just been talking about was gender balance and this sort of thing. I think that you do have to have the laws to be able to make the movement. Laws are never made for the people who follow them. They're made for the people who don't follow the law. So this sort of thing is probably, I can't, isn't that?
Well, not really.
Particularly,
it's a question designed to pass perhaps more than one term.
Yes.
And I think what you're saying is that the nature of your first term was really not one of lots of bills, but much bigger issues. Or
I think one area that I really would like to work to help, and I think maybe these are the questions, and once again it resolves around the health care question. But just this past week, in a appropriations committee, several parents of children who have severe handicaps, both physical and mental handicaps, were here saying that we need some governmental help to help them with their lives, because literally one or the other of the family has to be there constantly to take care of the child. And I do think we've moved to the place where we see that we need, that there is much more to be gained by community homes or keeping a child in their home. I think we face this with the elderly, and that if we can provide an in-home setting and the life that, and it's not so much the person who's being taken care of, but it is the people who provide the help for those people, and they need to be able to have a little more normal life. They need some respite. They need some time away, and then of course the financial cost is just unbelievable. So one thing I really do not believe, and I guess as we look at the property tax and we look at the tax issue, and I guess if there is a particular issue, is that I do not think that Kansas is a poor state. I think that if we look at our standard of living and the way that we live, we certainly have continued to increase our output, and we've never ever fallen down. Our population is still maintaining, even though we're going to lose one representative in the National Congress. We just haven't kept up quite as fast as other, and maybe we don't really want to gain population any faster. That's not necessarily the most desirable thing. But when we look at our general quality of life, Kansans have it pretty good. And I think it's really important for people to recognize that part of that quality of life is because collectively, as a state, we have said we want this quality of life, that it has to be paid for. And probably we receive more for our dollar in the monies that we spend through our government programs, things that we couldn't do for ourselves individually. So I guess that this would be the area that, and I guess I would be willing to, well, I'm sure, stand or fall on trying to find a fair way to tax, and yet not sacrifice the programs that I think we need for our state to provide a really good living for a good place to live for everyone.
I think that's a fine philosophy. Let me open a different door. You are a born and bred Kansan.
Yes.
Salina?
Yes.
Tell me about your original family, the family you were born into.
Yes, yes. My mother and father both came from Lynn County originally. They lived in two little towns, Parker and Lacine, that were great rivals. And my mother and father grew up there, but both my families go back about 5 generations in Kansas. So,
oh my!
So we're really Kansans for
sod houses and everything.
Well, now I'm not sure about the sod house bit. That's something I've never asked. But farming people, and in that respect, both families. Pretty much the Civil War had a lot to do with the fact that they were in Kansas, but then other parts of the family came to Kansas about that time. So we really are steeped in Kansas. My father, the most remarkable person I know. He's 90. Will be 95 June the 6th.
Oh, you have good genes.
Yes. And he was one of 6 boys, and my grandmother said your father was the only one who always came and said, "Hey, Moms, is there anything else that needs to be done?" So he really is. All of his life, he's done things for other people. He went to barber school so that he could finish normal school. He became he's one of the few veterans of World War I that in our area in Salina, and he was in the 3 of the 5 major campaigns of World War I.
Good heavens.
Belleau Wood and the Argonne Force. So he knows that part of it, and then he came back and finished his teaching degree. I think he started in Osawatomie, if I'm not mistaken. Then from Osawatomie, after about 3 years, he went to Salina and was in the Salina school system for 40 years. And then, right during the Depression, and with 3 little girls, well, 2 little girls actually, and I give my mother credit for standing by him and working with him on this. He decided he wanted to be an attorney, and so he went to KU, and he got his law degree. And so we would go down and spend summers on my grandparents' farm, and this is how I got to know all of my cousins, which is a real very important thing, and it's too bad more people don't. We're so mobile that we don't get to know all of our cousins and so forth. But I did. I had that advantage and privilege. Anyway, so my mother, very, very strong woman, and could really work circles around almost anybody. She's a very, 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 very self-willed woman and a very strong woman. And so they were really a marvelous pair. And my younger sister was born during the time that my father was going to law school. All 3 of us were born at my grandmother's home in the farm, but then went to Salina within 10 days of when we were little children, little people. So then lived my whole life in Salina. My father was after just 2 years in Salina, he became the principal of the Salina school system and did continue to do that, but he also practiced law, mainly probate. And
what was it about that made him want to do it? Why did he want that badly to become an attorney?
I just I just think that this was something that perhaps it has the whole business of government and politics and so forth. But anyway, of course he said he is able to provide for himself because now he does have to have total care, though his mind is still very sharp, and it's a joy and a pleasure to, and he loves when I come home on the weekend and tell him about what's been going on here. That's one of our favorite things. So, but he said he certainly never did make his money as a school teacher, but that his practice of law has made him be able to have a comfortable elderly life.
We all like to be able to pay for ourselves that way.
Right.
Did your mother ever work outside the home?
No. Though what she did was that we always lived in usually a larger house, and we had usually a spare bedroom, and she would rent out the spare bedroom, and that was her source of her own private money. And I've always thought it's important for everyone to have their own little, be it ever so small, to know that this is yours and you can spend it any way you want is very important.
I agree with you. Were you the eldest child?
No, I'm the middle.
You're the middle child.
Middle child.
I don't think birth order is going to turn out to be significant, but just in case, I'm collecting that too.
Yes.
You are a widow?
Yes. Yes.
Tell me about your husband and your own family, so to speak.
Yeah. He too was from Salina, and his family was a Salina family. I had gone to school at KU my freshman year, and this was in 1945, just at the end of World War II. And I came home in the summer of my December 1946, my freshman year, and he had come home from Europe, where he had spent 4 years in the service, and had gone in on D-Day, and had gone through. Was in Paris on the day that Paris was liberated.
Oh my!
Yes, so we have a, and I am sure that it was the most influential event of his whole life. I'm sure of this, the effect that it had on him. But anyway, so he had come through Salina expecting, to be moved on to the Pacific because the war in Europe was over, and then we dropped those bombs, and the war ended, and so he didn't ever have to go to the Pacific. But then I was coming back to KU, and he decided, well, maybe he would go to law school. He had a 2-week deferment to take his exams before he was inducted into the Army, and so he was enough older than I that I knew who he was, but I didn't really know him because we were growing up. And so he went back to law school, and he would have finished law school, and I was to finish my undergraduate degree. And except that after one semester, we were then married between my sophomore and junior year, and he decided that he had had enough school, and so I left school, which was probably the saddest day of my life, because I had no intention. I didn't go to school to find a husband. I went to school to get an education, and so moved back to Salina with him at that time. If it'd been today, I would have maybe said that I'll I'll come back to Salina when I finish my education. But I didn't have the foresight or the insight to do that at the time. So then we lived on a small farm just outside of Salina for 16 years. We had 3 boys, and then we moved into Salina about about 1964, I think it was, and John was involved in basically farming, but and some real estate, and then we have lived. We kind of an interesting thing is that we do live in an old home in Salina. It's about 104 years, 5 years old. It's corner of Santa Fe and Crawford, and you can't get anywhere in Salina without going by Santa Fe and Crawford.
I'll look for it.
Yes, do. It's a white brick house with gold shutters and 3 beautiful big old elm trees.
Oh.
We were able to.
Oh, they made it.
We made it through. We shot them. We invested our summer vacations in those trees rather than no. But anyway, we were able to keep them alive, and they are. I don't know what would happen to our house if those trees were gone. And then all three of our boys, Jack, Matt, and Will, attended University of Kansas. And the oldest son is basically involved in economics and math, and he works with a moving company here in Topeka. Then my second son, though he lives in Lawrence, is an attorney with the Judicial Council right across the street. So, and then my third son is a certified public accountant in Kansas City. So, and I have 6 grandchildren. So 4 little boys and 2 little girls.
So you
yes.
have a family. How did you end up going back to your education?
Well, as I told you, when John decided to not complete law school and went back to Salina, and as I say, this was probably one of the saddest times in my life. And then I had those 3 little boys, and then I just knew I had to finish school. So I enrolled at Kansas Wesleyan in Salina, and that's when I had to compromise a little bit because Kansas Wesleyan didn't have a political science major. I had to compromise for history, though I'm not sorry about that. But I majored then in history and then took my teaching hours, and then became a teacher, and it was very important to me. And then after a few years of teaching, I was able to go to Kansas State in the summertime, and also Marymount had some extension courses. So I was able to get my master's degree in education at Kansas State, and I'd always had a dream of walking down that hill at KU to get my. And so then, when my youngest son was the summer that he was between his junior and senior year, I decided that I would go back to school and see if I could still do the work, and had a really enjoyable experience going back to summer school. And so I applied for a leave of absence from our school, which they hadn't had but maybe 1 or 2 people ever do that. And so I applied for the leave of absence and was granted that. And so I went back and went that winter and summer, and was able to get all my coursework done, and then it took me 3 more summers and finished my dissertation, and was able to graduate from KU.
Congratulations. I know that's not easy. How long has your husband been gone?
Almost 4 years.
Almost 4 years. So
I hadn't run. I probably would not have run for the legislature if if I hadn't had this independence and felt that maybe I would have probably felt that if, and here I guess the gender thing comes in, that probably if anyone in our family was going to do that, it would be my husband rather than me.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to pry any more than this is what you want me to pry.
Sure.
You think it would have been harder on him for you to be the legislator than on you for him to be the legislator?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure that he would have, only in the fact that I would be stepping a little more out of the traditional roles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think you probably were right.
Yeah.
How do you manage this? I know you go home most weekends.
Yes.
Do you live here in Topeka during the week?
Small apartment, and they're in the home downstairs of a private home, and just a delightful. Jan Hutt is the lady with whom I live. She's an interior decorator, and I think she's with the.
I think that's why the name is familiar.
Yeah. Very, very, very nice arrangement. I had a delightful time.
I always ask this question also, and I say it can mean many things, and tell me what you want to. What does it cost you to be a legislator? Any kind of cost, emotional, monetary, whatever?
Well, this is unbelievable. It's a lower salary than I was getting as a public school teacher.
That's a commentary on something.
Yeah, right. So people who feel that we pay our legislators too much, I can guarantee you that I don't think so. And for what we are investing, I think it's money well invested. So there is a small business. The business of having to have a home here and a home in Salina. Being able to manage some things at home.
This is March 1st, 1991. I'm Sara Tucker. I'm interviewing Eloise Lynch, Democratic representative of the 71st District of Kansas, Salina, part of Salina, East half of Salina. And you understand that this will produce a transcript. You will have a chance to look at the transcript and make any amendments you feel you need to, but that it will be bound, put in the Kansas State Historical Society, the Washburn Library, and be used as a basis for scholarly research. Okay. I didn't think you'd fight me on that. Let me start as I always start.
Okay.
How did you get started in politics?
I think perhaps because my father was always interested in politics and always thought it was a very important part of people in a democracy to be involved in politics because we're the government. And so as a little girl, I always saw that he was involved. And then in college, I was a political science major. And then ended up being a high school government teacher. And that's pretty much, and then of course worked in the party as a young adult, even to some degree in high school in the young Democratic Party, and so I guess that it's just been a lifelong participation.
Why are you a Democrat?
I'm a Democrat because of conviction. I am aware of that. I think they tend to be a little bit more interested in issues that involve people as opposed to a little more orientation by Republicans toward business. And I think that's, I am a Democrat by conviction.
Was your family Democratic, or did you?
They were.
They were.
And I can remember in grade school, when they would say, well, now, are you going to vote for this president or this man or this? And in those days, of course, and still yet, we have to have a woman who will be the candidate for the first office, but I was always, which candidate are you going to vote for? And I can remember usually being one of not more than 5 in the classroom who held up their hand, because of course Kansas has always been traditionally Republican.
Yep. You are in your second term?
Yes.
As a representative?
Yes.
How did you come to be interested in, win the party candidacy of, and get elected to?
I was helping with our Democratic auction and fundraiser, and a couple of the people who were in the local county committee asked me if I would be willing to run, and of course at first I said, oh no, I didn't think there would be any possibility. And they said, well, don't tell us no, tell us you'll think about it. And we needed to file, I think it was April the 6th maybe, and on April the 4th, no, it was June, it was June the 6th, because I had gone to Chicago, and on the 4th of June I decided, okay, why not?
Now, was this an open seat? Were you being recruited against an incumbent? Or?
Yes, I ran against an incumbent.
My goodness.
Yes.
You won.
Yes.
How did you do that?
I think basically just a lot of hard work and door-to-door campaigning. I hope, maybe my position in the community, and I've lived in Salina all my life, and perhaps I think a lot of my students, particularly since I'm a government teacher, were helpful in that respect.
Tell me about your district. How would you describe your district?
My district is approximately the east half of Salina. It is made up of the most affluent and also the area of lower income people too. So it's a and it has its share. I think it's a fairly good distribution of upper, middle, and lower income people. Okay.
So it isn't like you have the most traditionally Democratic end of the city or anything like that?
There isn't one.
There isn't one.
Yeah, right.
So you worked hard. Was your incumbent opponent vulnerable? Had he or she gotten...
I think the most vulnerable point was that many of the constituents had begun to feel that he wasn't really looking out for the constituency. He was out. I don't think he took me very seriously. He had said fairly openly that he didn't think he'd have any problem, and he was out trying to scour the state for votes to be majority leader, and he wasn't at home tending the fire, and I think that had part of it.
Who was your opponent?
Bob Ott. A very nice gentleman, I would say.
Were there any issues between you?
Of course, the pension issue. That was one of the major issues. I think it was generally that people felt that he really wasn't watching out for the constituency, though. I believe that was the major.
How did you go about doing this? How did you get them real interested in you?
I think it was as I did go door to door, and I would start to talk to the people, and I found people. I will say that going door to door was a very enjoyable thing for me. It was. I like to meet the people. I like to talk to the people, and they seemed to be very open with me, and that was just the sentence that came up time and time again. We don't think Bob is really too concerned with what's happening.
Okay.
He seemed, I think the fact that he was in the oil business, perhaps he was looking out for some areas that involved those particular concerns, and they felt that he wasn't following a broad spectrum of issues that involved them too.
Now, you are a school teacher. That is what
Right.
you put down as your occupation.
Right.
I can quite understand how you had the time in the summer. Were you teaching a regular semester in the fall?
Yes.
How did you work this out with your school district that you were about to try to change jobs?
I would have to say that I really felt fortunate in the cooperation and the support in the sense that the school district made it possible for me to run. I went to them before I signed up to run, and I told them that I had thought about doing this, but I wanted to check with them first, and they said that was fine. And after I did win, we reached an agreement that I would teach the first semester, and then I have leave of absence the second semester. So they have been more than generous. They have said, they felt that it was important for the school district to have someone in the legislature, and so they have been most cooperative, and I really appreciate it.
That's good to hear. Everybody tells me that they work really, really hard, but nobody can do it by themselves.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
What kind of support were you able to mobilize to help you run?
Well, of course, I had a committee of about 5 people, 3 of whom just gave endless hours, and also were the 3 main people who helped me with my re-election campaign. And we met as often as 3 to 5 times a week, and made deadlines, made timelines, mapped out what we were wanting to do, set goals, both monetary goals and objective goals that we wanted to reach by certain times. And of course, I did have the support of the party, since the party had asked me to run, so that was a nice support. Also then, the people from my church were tremendous supporters. My school teaching friends, of course, I did receive the endorsement of KNEA, and so this was another very, very helpful group. Capers helped me. The Labor Temple helped me. I really was blessed with many, many people who gave lots of hours, and that's probably the secret of the victory, without a doubt.
How was your re-election experience?
that was a close one. It was something I didn't really, to tell you the truth, I didn't really fully anticipate. The first time I ran, I wanted to win, but I didn't really count on it that much. And so it was a relatively easy victory, and the whole evening I was leading the polls from the very first returns, and that was a surprise and pleasant. The second time that I ran, I really tried to do almost all of the same things that I had done before, except I had one complication, was the weather, because in addition to teaching school, I'm the tennis coach. And tennis season is right in the prime time of campaigning, the fall campaign.
Oh boy.
Is the heaviest. And the weather turned extremely hot, and the school board said that we could not practice until 6 o'clock in the evening. And from 6 until dark, or 5:30 until dark, was my prime walking time. And so for 2 weeks, no one expected to last more than a week. So for a week I just did that, and then on the weekends I just just was gone constantly out of my house from 8 o'clock in the morning until dark in the evening on Saturdays, and then all of Sunday afternoon until it was dark. I had to just, but it went on for 3 weeks, and I think that those are the crucial weeks. My opponent walked hard, and she called on the houses, and she talked to the people, and I can almost pick out the precincts where I wasn't able to get to all of the houses, and it turned out to be an extremely close election. And on election night, I started out, I was ahead, never by more than 50. Then she was ahead, and until the very last precinct came in, she was ahead, never by more than, I think about 90 some was the highest. And the last precinct came in, and at that point she had 50 more votes than I did, and I won by 42 votes.
Oh my.
So, I mean, it was, I was already screwing up my courage to be a gracious loser.
And luckily you didn't.
Yes.
So were there any issues or anything, aside from just the mechanics of being able to walk that made it hard?
Well, no, I don't think she did spend a great deal of money. I think she spent around someplace between $28,000 to $30,000, which is a rather large amount to spend for a district legislative district election. At least I know it may not be, in some of the larger cities, but it was. Her campaign was managed by a Topeka firm, and she had very nice brochures. She did have a lot of polish in her campaign. She really did, and this I'm sure is probably part of a factor. I think she mainly tried to say she was better informed and better qualified to be the legislator than I was, and this was her main thrust or approach.
What were her qualifications that she felt were better?
I'm not. She had really been in Topeka almost daily for the whole 2 years of my first term. She was a now I don't think she was a lobbyist, but she did work for the AMA was one of the groups that she helped and worked with. She had been president. Whoops, I think that's wrong. She'd been head of the legislative branch of the medical auxiliary, if I'm not mistaken. I may not be accurate in this, but I believe that was her job. And so she had been involved with the legislature, particularly watching the legislature and watching the issues.
Would you, on the record, tell what her name is?
Yes, her name is Nancy Macy.
Nancy Macy. Well, here you are. You've been here for over a full term. You're in your third year here. Let me ask you, how do you define your job?
I see it as the lawmaking responsibility to be the representative of the 71st District in Kansas and to participate in the making of the laws for our state.
How did you set about to do this when you first got here, or how do you do it now, or both?
Pretty much, it's structured for us in that the major work of of course, the organization along the party lines. And, of course, I've been extremely fortunate in that the first term, though we were the minority party, we were not so far behind the Republican Party that we didn't have an opportunity to have great influence on what the legislature determined, and also the fact that the Republican Party wasn't totally united, and that there was there were a couple of groups within the party, and sometimes the smaller group would vote with the Democrats, anyway there would be a coalition, and so we tended to influence some of the legislation quite definitely the way the session went. Then of course once you get past your majority and minority party, the fact that the committee is the real source of the work, and those committees are established. And I believe if I counted correctly, I think there are 20 or 21 of those.
Somebody coming in from outside, it looks like there's a million of them.
Yes. And usually each representative has 3 major committees, and as we meet at 9 o'clock and at 1:30 and at 3:30. And of course the party caucus that meets each morning and discusses either brings in people who are talking about major issues, or talks about the bills that you're going to be voting on, or brings in information. At this point, I can't say too highly or give enough credit to our legislative research department. They are marvelous. They're extremely well qualified people who truly do a great service for the state of Kansas in making available information for legislators to have a basis for making, hopefully, wise decisions. So I think this is the main. Then I'm always here. Well, almost always here by 7 in the morning, and I use that time to go through my mail, and hopefully I've had a chance to get the mail separated out the day before, but then I try to find the letters that need to be answered. The caucus is at 8:30, so that gives you about an hour and a half to get that done. If you need to see somebody for information or so forth, you have about that hour and a half. And then I make a rule while the legislature is going on. There are many invitations and receptions, dinners, meetings, breakfast, lunch, and dinner time, and so those times are pretty well filled up with lobbyists or with groups who come in who have, and this of course is the way it should be. I mean, it's so important that the people in the state who have an interest, that they come to the Capitol and talk to their legislators, and it isn't necessary to have the dinner or the lunch or the breakfast, but to sit down and talk with them, because this is why we're here. So
lobbying is not necessarily a dirty word to you.
No, not at all, And this is well, what do they say? The third house of the legislature, and it's an honorable, it's a very honorable thing, and it needs to be recognized that and used as a source of knowing what the people want. You have to certainly be aware that many times, and I guess this is the greatest drawback, that the ordinary citizen doesn't have the skill or the knowledge of organizing and coming to the Capitol. But when it does happen, such as the gifted program this year, or some particular property tax last year, our halls were filled with citizens from all the different large, small, and rural communities, and this is just the way it should work, and their voice should be heard. and so no, I don't think lobbying is a dirty word at all.
That's very eloquent. Let me go back to something you said. You said committees were very important. What committees did you ask for when you first got here?
The strange thing, because of my background in education, I had asked for education, and I've never served on the education department committee. I've almost come to the conclusion that because I have such a dedicated interest in that area, that maybe it is just as well because I'm going to follow that one anyway. As it turned out, my freshman year, I served on labor and industry, which is still a very great interest to me, and I am still serving on that committee. I served on local government, and I served on, for heaven's sakes, now I had it just a second ago. I served on the insurance committee, and this was a very one of the probably the major issue that came up during my first term. In fact, the first session, I should say, was the malpractice question. And so serving on the insurance committee really gave me a good background and a tie-in on malpractice. And I remember the very first time that we went home and we were having a coffee or a breakfast for the Chamber of Commerce breakfast. And, I guess a lot of people call it eggs and issues. I don't think that's what Salina calls it. But anyway, the room was packed with over 350 people. And the question was malpractice. And of course, the issue became resolved by a judicial decision, which recognized as constitutional the cap that had been placed. So it quieted down. I think some of the points that particularly involve me. Well, one of them is mainly that I feel that one of the greatest questions that faces our whole country is the question of responsibility. And this is one of the things that a person who goes into medicine has to accept. That though it is very well rewarded for private practice, it also carries with it a great deal of responsibility, and the person on the other side, the person who that the lawsuit is a lawsuit for a malpractice, which means intent, rather than just a malaccurrence. And so this is where I think the problem is, and I know that there are lots and lots of real personal problems that develop along this line. But the courts have said, made their ruling. So we will go. But I think that in every area, not just in the practice of medicine, but in every area of life, we've got to be willing to accept the responsibility of the decisions and the actions, not just the decisions, but the actions that we take. So that's sort of my position as far as malpractice is concerned.
And I think maybe a little bit of philosophy of life in there.
Yes.
It's interesting about committees. We started out perhaps putting too much emphasis on them, but I always follow up so we do have a base of information, and I am finding out how important people feel committees and their work on committees are.
They really are. It really is.
What committees are you on now?
All right. I still am on labor and industry, and the one change that no, that's not true. I am no longer on local government. I'm on public health and welfare. And the third one is energy and natural resources. And those, the environment, energy and natural resources, those are I think just prime concerns for the whole state of Kansas. And now I'm pulling back in something else. One of the major things that I did run on my first campaign was that government by crisis was the worst possible kind of government. And that unfortunately for my opponent, he had made a statement about government by crisis, and so of course I grabbed onto that, and I still believe that with thoroughly and completely. I'm not sure how we totally get away from that problem. It's because you can't get people to listen, or you can't get people necessarily. The majority of people don't want to take answers that are probably necessary to solve some of the problems until it does get to a crisis situation. And then, of course, some of the possible solutions are gone by that time. But I feel that in public health and welfare, because I do think, even more than property tax, I think that the question of health care is probably the number one problem facing the average cancer. Each one of us has the problem of health care. Cost is so exorbitant.
What solution would you like to go toward?
Well, very frankly, I'm really in the learning process. We have heard, of course, the Canadian health plan. A very well-informed gentleman who works with the Canadian health plan is not himself a doctor, but is part of the governmental structure that helps to set it up. Spoke with us, the insurance committee, and there once again the importance of the insurance committee, and of course Blue Cross and Blue Shield and the health providers, the health insurance providers, and also the doctors. They're a part of this, and I did serve on this summer interim committee of public health and welfare, and we began to bring in all of the information on possible solutions, and we've really just scratched the surface. But I know that time doesn't really permit us to lag too long, because we really are already at a crisis situation when the average family has to pay more for their house payment, for their medical insurance each month than they do their house payment. We've got a problem. And what is it? 300,000 people who have no health insurance, and so this is just. Then, of course, the whole area is just rife with questions. The question of what kind of health program do we want to provide? Question of basic health care. The question of do we exotic transplants, prenatal care, the elderly. The
priorities is not an easy.
No, that one's going to be that one in itself is going to be a tough one.
Tell me, how this is all circling around back.
Yes.
How do you think the legislature works, and can you get done whatever you want to get done within it as it works now?
Not within a term. This is one of the reasons why I feel that it's important that we not limit the number of terms that I'm going to sneeze. I'm sorry about this. All right.
I'm ready.
Right. All right. I'll try to.
Would you like to take a break and get some Kleenex and some drink?
Yeah.
Let me turn. Okay, we're back, and you're supplied with a Kleenex. You were going to explain to me. You were talking about the fact that you oppose term restrictions.
Right. In that, if a person is really doing their job, or his job, her job, then I think it is to the benefit of the state to, and if their constituency recognizes this and is willing to send them back, then I think we deprive ourselves of a great deal of knowledge and good public servants if we say it is limited. Now, 12 years seems like that should be quite a long time, but the average length of time from the time an idea is introduced to the time that it becomes a piece of legislation, that's a major idea, is 20 years.
That's interesting.
And basically, I think it's because, as an electorate, we aren't that well informed. and we're not willing to take the actions that are necessary, or perhaps we don't think the problem is.
Okay.
We were talking, about costs.
Yes,
costs. I can't think of any other, and the experience has far outweighed any of the costs.
What do you get out of it?
Oh, to feel that, well, sometimes it is a frustration, but at least you can talk, you have the opportunity to speak and to work for those things that you think that will be of some help to people. And the people that you meet is a marvelous experience. And being from over the whole state, and it helps you to be a little bit more aware, I think, of the vast number of points of view that have to be taken in. That you're trying to integrate the needs of so many areas that you probably don't even, you wouldn't have thought of it yourself just because you're not exposed to it. So just the opportunity to be exposed to various points of view is well worth it. It's a true opportunity.
Assuming, of course, the people of Salina continue to return you, do you see yourself staying here a while?
I would like to. They don't need to worry about 12 years. I'm not. I don't have a problem of being. That part isn't a problem as far as that, and that isn't why I'm opposed to that. It's truly that I think that that if there is a good and a qualified person, it's too bad to turn them out at the end of 12 years. But I have really enjoyed it. I should like to stay for a while.
You sound like you enjoyed it.
Yes.
Well, let me ask you, is there a question you thought I'd ask, or that I should ask to get on the record?
You've asked very, very wide-ranging questions, and I think
that was our aim.
Right.
I mean, one thing.
Yes.
What does happen with your cat?
With my cat? Oh, it's a really neat. I told you I had a committee of about 5 and 3 people. Well, of the 3 persons who have been extremely just dedicated and so wonderful. In fact, the one lady, Lona Steele, who's our French teacher at South High where I teach, her son Lance, who is a 7th grader this year, he comes down every night and feeds my cat and stays and plays with him for about 45 minutes. So, and they have a cat it's a black and white cat. Mine is short hairs. Theirs is a little bit longer hair. But and my cat's name is Foot, and the reason his name is Foot is that another colleague of mine from the teaching field, an English teacher who's a very dear friend, she knows I love animals, and she thought I needed a cat when John died. She thought, you really need something there in your home. So she had found this cat under a car at Dillon's. It was and it was crying, and she was afraid that someone would come out and get in the car and back over this cat. So she took him to the vet, and he got all checked out and everything. And so she called me and said, "Won't you come over and see the cat?" And she said, "He's really beautiful. He's all black, and he looks like he's dressed to go to a party. Tux, a little vest, and little white feet." And so I knew I shouldn't do it, but I went over to her house, and I took, and they said, we gave this cat the name Friendly because he's so friendly, and so it was Friendly. And then my oldest little grandson, I said, "Hey, Graham has a cat. What do you think I ought to name it?" And without a thought, he said, "Tommy." Tommy's his favorite name. That's his dog's name too. So Tommy. Okay, that meant Friendly Tommy, and that's FT, and that's short for Foot. So that's The cat's name is Bud. And he's a wonderful cat.
Very clever grandmother. Well, I want to thank you for one of the more elegant endings of an interview.
Right.